Good evening, and welcome back to SleepWise. Tonight, we drift into a year that still echoes softly through modern life, not as a shout, but as a lesson carried in paper, light, and human hope. We'll move slowly, as if we're walking a quiet street after the shops have closed, letting each detail settle like dust in lamplight, never rushing, never alarming, only noticing. Our guide for this gentle retelling is the book 1929, Inside the Greatest Crash in Wall Street History and How It Shattered a Nation, by Andrew Ross Sorkin. We won't stay on the cover for long. We'll simply take its hand for the first few steps and then slip into the story itself, into the rhythm of days that felt ordinary until they didn't. Imagine New York in the late 1920s, a city with bright windows and late trains, a place where night still feels busy and confidence feels like a kind of weather. Jazz spills from doorways, newspapers crackle open at breakfast tables. Conversations carry the same easy phrase again and again, that the future is wider, faster, better. And somewhere beneath all that glow, there is a system quietly doing its work. A marketplace where people trade small claims on big dreams, where a number written on a thin strip of paper can make a heart lift or drop, where the day's mood can ride on a few points, a few whispers, a few hurried phone calls. But tonight, we won't begin with the fall. We begin with the softness before it, the way optimism can feel like warmth, and how warmth can sometimes make us loosen our grip. So settle in. Let your shoulders fall away from your ears. Let the room be exactly as it is. If your thoughts wander, that's fine. We'll give them something gentle to hold. In a moment, we'll step into that glowing city and listen for the quiet signs that always come before a turning point. Faint as distant footsteps, easy to miss and almost peaceful until you know their name. We'll speak of stocks and loans the way you might speak of tides and wind, forces that can be measured but also felt. We'll notice how borrowing can make a rise seem effortless, how crowds can turn uncertainty into momentum, and how late information can invite imagination to rush in. You don't have to remember dates or names. You only have to float along, picking up a few ideas that glow softly in the dark. Because this is SleepWise, we'll keep our footing. When the story reaches its louder moments, we'll hold them at a distance like thunder heard from far across the sea. The goal is not to relive panic, but to understand how it forms and how calm in the end returns. Picture ticker tape drifting down like paper snow, small symbols repeating in neat rows. Picture a steady building of stone and columns. Picture a desk lamp and the circle of light it makes as someone leans closer to read the day's numbers. We'll start there, in the everyday, in the glow, the habits, the confident routines. Tonight, the world slows just enough for us to notice the way New York used to shine. Not the kind of shine that demands attention, more like the steady glow of street lamps after rain, and the warm squares of light in apartment windows stacked into the sky. Taxis slide through avenues, shoes click on sidewalks. Somewhere, a doorman turns the brass handle of a heavy door, and inside there is music. Soft horns, a piano, laughter that rises and settles again. In those years, the city felt like a promise you could walk through. People spoke about modern times the way you might speak about spring, as something inevitable, something that arrives no matter what, bringing new cars, new radios, new routines. There were more electric signs, more advertisements, more things that seemed to hum with confidence. Even the air carried it, a sense that the nation had found a faster heartbeat. And in the morning, newspapers arrived like daily weather reports, folded and crisp, ink still smelling faintly of metal and oil. The market pages were no longer for a small circle of specialists. They were for everyone, barbers and shopkeepers, secretaries and salesmen, families at breakfast tables, the commuter leaning on a strap in a streetcar. The numbers began to feel like a shared language. If you had been near Wall Street, you might have seen the crowds gather not only inside the buildings but outside them too. Men in hats, collars turned up against the wind, pausing to read the latest quotes posted on boards. Faces tilted toward the chalk and paper as if toward a stage. A few points up could bring a smile. A few points down could bring a frown that disappeared as quickly as it came. It's a strange comfort, really, to watch numbers move. They give the day a shape. They make the future feel measurable. They can make you believe that if you only pay close attention, you'll know what happens next. Tonight, we let that belief drift in the background, like the city's distant traffic. We're not judging it. We're simply observing the atmosphere, how prosperity can feel like a bright room, and how a bright room can make you forget where the doors are. In a moment, we'll step closer to the exchange itself, not as a place of drama, but as a living machine made of hands, voices, and paper, doing its work, one small transaction at a time. There were small rituals of the era that made optimism feel physical. A new suit pressed flat, a watch checked and rechecked, a storefront announcing a grand opening. Even the word investment sounded clean, almost wholesome, as if it meant taking care of tomorrow. And yet, beneath the cheer, you could already sense how tightly people were holding the idea of constant ascent. When a belief becomes common, it becomes quiet. It stops sounding like an opinion and starts sounding like a fact. And that is when it can guide thousands of choices without anyone noticing they're choosing. Inside the exchange, everything was designed for speed, even though speed, back then, still had edges. Picture a large room with high ceilings and hard floors where sound travels easily. There are desks and railings, clerks with pencils, runners weaving between bodies, and a steady tide of voices. Prices are not whispered into screens. They are called out into air. A hand lifts, two fingers flare, a palm turns. Signals that mean buy, sell, how many, at what price. It's a choreography you learn with your whole body. And then there is the ticker tape. Somewhere else, in another corner of the system, machines print prices onto narrow strips of paper, letter by letter, number by number. The tape curls as it comes out, warm from friction, like a ribbon. A clerk tears it, passes it along, and the information begins its journey. Through offices, banks, back rooms, out to the boards and the papers and the homes that have learned to care. But the tape can only print so fast. On a busy day, it starts to lag. Minutes become longer than minutes. The market moves, yet the public sees the past. In that gap, the mind does what minds do. It fills in. When you don't know exactly what the price is right now, you imagine, you guess. You listen harder to rumors and tone. You scan faces for clues, and all of that imagining can become a kind of market of its own, trading in fear and relief. Even without panic, delays create a particular kind of tension, like waiting for a kettle you can't see, listening for the change in sound. The room can be calm, but not restful, alert, but not clear. Outside the exchange, there were brokerage offices where ordinary people could place orders. The word ordinary matters. This wasn't only a game for wealthy families anymore. A person could walk in, sit down, and speak a sentence that felt small. Buy me 10 shares, and feel, for a moment, like they had joined the machinery of the nation. The process had rituals, a phone call, a slip of paper, a confirmation. And those rituals made the whole thing feel solid, even when the underlying thing, human confidence, was always moving. Tonight, we keep our breath slow as we watch this system. It's not a monster. It's not magic. It's a room full of people and paper, plus a great many hopes arranged into numbers. And soon, very soon, we'll meet the quiet lever that made those numbers feel unusually powerful. Borrowing that could turn a modest step into a long stride and a stumble into a fall. You could think of it like watching distant stars through cloud. The stars are real, the clouds are real, but what you see is delayed, softened, and your brain does the rest. A market thrives on shared agreement, on the simple notion that a buyer and seller can meet at a price. When the tape lags, that meeting becomes harder. The room becomes louder, and the louder the room, the more tempting it is to follow the nearest confident voice. Borrowing, at first, can sound like a practical detail, the way an umbrella sounds like a practical detail. You don't think about it much until the weather changes. In the late 1920s, many people bought stocks on margin. The phrase is gentle. It suggests a border, a little extra space. But what it meant was simple. You didn't pay the full price. You paid a portion, and you borrowed the rest. You might put down $10 for something that cost $100, and the remaining $90 would come from a loan arranged through your broker. When prices rose, this felt brilliant. Your small down payment controlled something much larger. If the stock went up 10%, your profit, measured against what you put down, could feel enormous. It wasn't only the numbers that rose, it was the feeling of being right, and the feeling of being early, and the feeling that you understood the rhythm of the world. But borrowing is a promise you carry into the future, and promises have conditions. If the price fell, the lender wanted protection. The broker would call and ask you to add more money to top up your account so the loan stayed safe. This is called a margin call. Again, the words are calm. They sound like paperwork, yet the experience can be sharp. A request that arrives suddenly, asking for cash now, not later. If you couldn't meet the call, the broker could sell your stock for you to repay the loan, not because the broker hated you, not because the world was cruel, because the loan needed to be covered and the system was built to protect itself. Now, imagine many people doing this at the same time. Many people borrowed. Many people felt safe while prices climbed. And if prices began to fall, many people could receive the same quiet message: add cash or we sell. This is where the lever shows itself. Borrowing doesn't just magnify gains, it magnifies urgency. It can turn a slow change into a fast one because it forces action at the worst possible moment. Tonight, we hold this idea gently, like a small stone in your palm. Leverage, a tool that can lift and a tool that can topple, depending on the ground beneath it. And beneath margin loans, there was another layer of borrowing, short-term money that could be asked back quickly. A river of credit flowing through the city, calm on the surface, ready to change direction. In the next part, we'll follow that river and see how it tied many separate decisions into one shared fate. Some people treated margin like a bridge. Others treated it like a ladder. And ladders are wonderful until you realize how far you are from the ground. It also changed the way people talked. Instead of, I own this, the language became, I'm in this, as if the market were a train you could board and ride, and as long as you stayed on, you would arrive somewhere better. The difference is subtle, but it matters. Own is steady. In is motion. The river of short-term money had a name that sounded almost polite. Call loans. A call loan is a loan that can be demanded back, called on short notice. It's the kind of arrangement that works beautifully when everyone trusts everyone. The lender earns interest, the borrower gets flexible funding, and the whole arrangement feels like a well-oiled hinge. In those years, brokers often relied on call loans to finance the borrowing of their customers. Banks and other lenders supplied the funds. The broker passed them through, and the investor on margin felt the ease of it, like riding a bicycle downhill with the wind behind you. But call loans have a particular temperament. They are calm until they are not. They sit quietly in the background until the lender decides that risk is rising and wants their money back. If lenders began to worry about the market, about their own needs, about rumors of trouble, they could pull that money in, not forever, just now, just today. And when they did, brokers had to find replacement funds quickly, or reduce loans, or sell collateral. Collateral is just the thing you pledge as security. In this case, the stocks themselves were collateral. So a tightening in call loans could lead to selling stocks, not because someone had decided the company was bad, but because the plumbing of credit was shifting. This is one of the quieter truths of markets. Sometimes prices move because of opinions, and sometimes they move because of mechanics. The mechanics are not dramatic. They are almost boring, and that is why they can be missed. A few percentage points here, a change in rates there, a lender choosing to be slightly more cautious. And suddenly the river slows, and the boats begin to crowd together. Meanwhile, the public mood still had its glow. People still spoke about opportunity. The city still felt modern. The parties still happened. Yet beneath it, in offices where men wore sleeves gartered at the elbow, decisions were being made about how much credit was too much. Tonight, we don't turn these details into fear. We turn them into understanding, like learning how a storm forms far out at sea, not to frighten yourself, but to recognize the patterns of air and water. In the next part, we'll move toward the crest, those days when the market seemed endlessly confident. And we'll notice how the smallest changes in confidence begin, often as ordinary conversations. A headline, a remark, a pause, and then a shift. It's also why the mood of bankers mattered so much. A bank doesn't need to shout to change the world. It only needs to adjust a term, shorten a deadline, raise a rate by a little, or decide that today it prefers cash in its own vault. And once a few institutions do that, others may follow, not out of malice, but out of caution. Caution can spread, too, quietly, respectably. The way you might notice one person putting on a coat and then decide to put on yours. If you were watching from a distance, you might have thought the whole thing was simply enthusiasm, a nation finally believing in itself. But there was another ingredient, quieter and more persuasive than any headline, the idea that prosperity had become something you could enter even with a modest step. Brokerages made it easy to participate. Newspapers printed lists of prices beside the weather, and conversations began to treat the market the way people once treated farmland or a small shop, as a place where ordinary effort could grow into something lasting. In homes and offices, people learned new words: shares, dividends, blue chips. They learned that a company could be a railroad or a utility or a manufacturer, and that owning a small piece of it could feel like owning a small piece of the future. And then, gently, another idea arrived, that you didn't have to wait to have the full amount, that you could borrow and still belong. That borrowing was not a desperate act, but a modern tool, as respectable as a mortgage. It took the sting out of risk by dressing it as convenience. So the market became crowded with hopes of different sizes. Big hopes in boardrooms, small hopes in kitchen chairs, a few shares bought with careful savings, a few shares bought with borrowed money. The details varied, but the feeling was the same, an upward pull. You could almost hear it in the phrases people used. It's going higher. It always comes back. We're in a new era. The words were not shouted. They were said with the quiet certainty of something everyone around you seems to know. And when certainty becomes social, it becomes soothing. It tells the mind it can stop worrying. It invites you to loosen your grip, to lean a little farther over the rail. Tonight, we notice that leaning, not to blame anyone, not to make it heavy, but to understand how the human nervous system loves a pattern. When a line goes up for long enough, the brain starts to file it away as normal. It becomes part of the background, like the steady hum of a refrigerator at night. Some evenings, the market's rise was described the way people describe a good season, as if the world itself had decided to be generous. And when the world feels generous, it's natural to accept the gift. You could hear market talk in places that had never hosted it before. Over the counter, at a pharmacy, in a factory lunch break, on a front porch, while the radio warmed up. A quote might be repeated the way a sports score is repeated, not because it changes your life in that moment, but because it makes you feel connected to a larger story. And connection, too, can feel like safety. In the next part, we'll step closer to the months when the climb felt easiest, when records arrived so often they stopped surprising anyone. And we'll listen for the first tiny change in tone, the first place where the music thins. By late summer, the climb had the smoothness of a well-worn staircase. There were days when the market rose and people barely paused to notice. Not because it was unimportant, but because it had begun to feel expected. Records came, and then came again. A new high did not feel like an event. It felt like confirmation. In New York, the air in September can be gentle, the heat easing, the light turning honey-colored at the edges of buildings. In that light, confidence looks even more believable. The city keeps moving, and the market, it seems, keeps moving with it. When a peak arrives in real time, it rarely announces itself as a peak. It looks like another step forward, another day, in a familiar pattern. The numbers print, the boards update, the papers report, and the mind nods along as if it is reading something inevitable. And yet, at the very top, the system is often at its most delicate. Because the room is full, the borrowing is high, and the distance between price and patience has grown wide. A small shift can matter more than it would have mattered earlier. A small doubt can travel farther. Some people began to sense it as a change in texture, a rise that felt slightly thinner, a conversation that ended with a shrug instead of a grin, a headline that sounded a touch more careful. These are not alarms. They are faint weather signs, a pressure change you notice only if you're paying close attention. There were also the sober voices, bankers, economists, officials, who reminded anyone who would listen that growth doesn't erase gravity. Their words were often reasonable, even polite. But reasonable words have trouble competing with a crowd that feels rewarded. The strange thing about a boom is that caution can look like a personality flaw. It can feel like pessimism. It can sound like envy. And so many people simply kept walking toward the bright doors, preferring the warmth of agreement. In those weeks, investment trusts and new offerings were spoken about with an almost celebratory tone, as if finance itself had learned a clever trick. People gathered in hotel lounges and restaurants and talked about the market the way they talked about travel plans, with ease, with imagination, with a sense that doors were opening. Even the act of checking prices became a small daily ritual, like looking at the sky. Tonight, we don't hurry. We stand here for a moment at the height of the mood and let it be what it was. A shared belief that tomorrow would be richer than today. In the next part, we'll feel the first wobble, not a dramatic fall, but the beginning of uncertainty, arriving in small movements, the way a boat begins to rock before the wind truly changes. And because it felt shared, it felt sturdy, as if so many believing could make a thing unbreakable. The first wobble rarely feels like a warning. It feels like weather. A down day arrives and people explain it away. Profit-taking. A healthy pause. Just the market catching its breath. These phrases are soothing because they preserve the story. They let the mind keep its tidy filing cabinet. Up is normal, down is temporary. Then another choppy day comes. Prices flicker. The ticker runs a little behind. And that gap, the small delay between what is happening and what you can know, begins to matter again. When the tape lags, the room fills with interpretation. You can't see clearly, so you listen more sharply. You lean closer to voices. You look for certainty in tone. In brokerage offices, clerks move a bit faster. Phones ring with a slightly tighter rhythm. There is more paper on desks, more erasing, more rechecking. It is not chaos. It is simply attention sharpening, like a cat hearing something in the grass. Rumors move faster than facts. A headline hints at concern. A commentator mentions speculation with a firmer voice. Somewhere in the background, institutions begin to think about tightening credit, about being prudent, about protecting their own balance sheets. None of this is dramatic in isolation, but together it changes the temperature of the room. Outside, the city still runs on its ordinary rails. People still buy bread. Trains still arrive. A person can still laugh at a joke in a cafe. And that ordinariness makes the market's unease feel almost unreal, like something happening in a different layer of the world. But markets are sensitive to mood. 1,000 small doubts can add up to one shared question. What if the pattern changes? Some investors begin to sell, not because they are certain, but because they want to be ready. Others see the selling and feel a prickle of discomfort. A few decide to wait it out. And all of these choices interact, weaving into a fabric that no one person controls. This is the quiet power of a crowd. It doesn't need a leader. It doesn't need a plan. It only needs the same nervous system repeated many times, each mind watching the others for cues. On certain afternoons, the selling can feed on itself simply because borrowing sits underneath it. A small drop can trigger a margin call. A margin call can force a sale. A forced sale can push prices down again. The mechanism is simple, and that simplicity is what makes it fast. Tonight, we hold this gently. We are not riding the drop. We are standing beside the machine, watching its gears begin to turn. In the next part, we'll step into late October when the room becomes crowded, the hours feel tight, and an ordinary morning begins to tilt, quietly at first, toward a day history would remember. And when temperature changes, even a calm crowd can begin to shiver. Late October arrives with a different kind of light. The mornings are cooler, the sky seems higher, and on Wall Street, the usual routines begin as they always do. People stepping off trains, coats brushed, newspapers folded under arms, a quick nod to the familiar faces at the door. Inside the exchange, the room fills. Orders come in. Voices rise and fall. The first trades of the day are not yet a catastrophe. They are simply busy. Then the pace quickens. Selling becomes heavier and heavier still, as if someone has opened a valve. The ticker tape begins to lag more noticeably now. Prices print, but they are already behind. The delay stretches, and with it stretches uncertainty. It is difficult to hold calm when you cannot see the present. And so, people look to one another, and the room becomes its own echo. There is an odd sensation that appears in crowds at moments like this, a tightening. Not panic, exactly, at least not yet, but a collective readiness, like hands hovering over railings. Telephones ring. Runners weave through bodies with slips of paper held tight. Clerks scribble, erase, scribble again. Faces tilt toward the boards as if toward a shoreline, watching the tide pull back. Outside, the streets gather their own audience. People stop, and then more people stop, drawn by the sense that something important is happening. A few glance up at the buildings as if expecting to see answers in the windows. The selling grows. Some stocks drop sharply. Some buyers step in, but the weight of orders presses down. The room has a feeling of imbalance, as if too many people have moved to one side of a boat. And still, within the loudness, there are attempts at steadiness. People speak in measured tones. They try to project composure to keep the machine functioning. Because as long as the machine functions, there is hope that the moment will pass. At moments, the market seems to catch itself. There are purchases that look deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if certain powerful hands are placing weight where weight is needed. The idea is simple: to remind everyone that there are still buyers, still value, still a floor. For a little while, it helps. The room exhales in small, cautious breaths. Tonight, we don't dramatize. We simply sit with the texture of the day, the way time feels strange, the way information arrives late, the way uncertainty becomes a physical thing in a room. In the next part, we'll feel the brief pause that came after the worst hours, a show of confidence meant to calm the waters, and the fragile relief that followed, like a hand smoothing rumpled cloth. Even then, you can sense how tired the day has made people, like standing too long in a crowded station waiting for a train that keeps being delayed. When a day like that ends, the city does not suddenly become quiet. There are still dinners, still streetlights, still the ordinary work of coming home. But the mind carries the day in a different way now, as if a small pebble has been placed in the shoe. You can walk, yes. You can even talk. Yet every few steps you feel it again. That weekend, newspapers feel heavier in the hands. People reread the same sentences. They scan for reassurance in the language of experts, and sometimes find it, and sometimes do not. In barbershops and lobbies, conversations circle the same question: was it the beginning of something, or only a rough patch? For some, the instinct is to cling to the familiar story. The market has had down days before. It has always come back. For others, a new thought appears, quiet but persistent. What if the borrowing is too much? What if the crowd is too crowded? What if the floor is not as solid as it seemed? And beneath these thoughts is a practical pressure that does not care about philosophy. Loans have deadlines. Accounts have requirements. A margin call does not wait for confidence to return. It asks politely and firmly for cash. So the weekend is filled with small private calculations. A person counts what they can sell, what they can spare, what they can borrow from somewhere else. The sounds are domestic: drawer slides, coins in a dish, a checkbook opened on a table. Yet the feelings are large. By Monday morning, the air is cooler still. People return to their desks with a careful expression, as if approaching an animal that might startle. The exchange fills again. The tape begins again. The machinery wakes. At first, there is hope that Friday's steadiness will hold. Then the selling returns heavier than before, and the room tightens in recognition. It is not one decision. It is many decisions arriving together. The crowd shifting its weight. You can imagine the sounds of Monday: telephones with quicker rings, paper whispering as it changes hands, the soft scrape of a chair as someone stands a little too fast. In moments, the tape falls further behind, and people begin to trade not on certainty, but on the fear of being late. Late to sell, late to protect cash, late to answer the call. This is Black Monday, and it has the feeling of gravity. Not a scream, but a pull. Tonight, we won't plunge into it. We will keep our distance, the way you watch a storm from the safe side of a window. In the next part, we'll move through the day's arc, and then into the final wave that followed, when the market's noise reached its loudest point, and the lesson began to settle into the nation like a long shadow. For now, let your breathing stay slow. The story can be loud, but you don't have to be. Tonight, we stay close to the floorboards of history, where big events are made from small motions. After Black Monday, the city carries a careful hush, not silence, but a kind of cautious listening. In offices, people arrive early and speak a little less. In brokerage rooms, clerks straighten stacks of paper, as if neatness might restore order. And in homes, breakfast plates sit beside newspapers opened once, then opened again, as if the ink might rearrange itself into better news. On Tuesday morning, the exchange fills once more. The ritual continues, because it must. The doors open. The first orders arrive. For a few minutes, the day still feels like a day. Familiar, measurable, contained. Then, little by little, the selling thickens. It is not one roar. It is many footsteps, a cluster of orders, a wave of requests to get out, to reduce, to protect what can still be protected. Some people sell because they are frightened. Others sell because they have been instructed to. Others sell because the loan beneath their position has tightened, and they have no choice. Mechanics and emotion braid together until you can't easily tell them apart. The ticker tape begins to lag again, and the lag feels heavier now, as if time itself is slipping. The present moves away from you, and you are left holding a printout of the past. When you can't see clearly, you grasp at signals, a hurried stride, a hand covering the mouth for a private call. Outside, the sidewalks gather watchers. People press close to the posted boards, trying to read numbers that refuse to hold still. Some laugh briefly in disbelief. Some stand very quiet, as if the body knows before the mind does. Inside the exchange, bids disappear. A seller can always sell if someone is willing to buy. When willingness fades, the room feels hollow. And yet, in the midst of it, there are still attempts at steadiness. There are still hands that place orders to buy, to show that value exists, to suggest that the floor is still there. For a moment, you can feel the crowd lean toward relief. But the weight is too great. The volume is too large. The day keeps pouring forward. We don't need to hold every number. We only need the sensation, a system built on confidence shuddering when confidence becomes scarce, and scarcity spreading when everyone reaches for the same exit. In the next part, we'll stay with Tuesday as it unfolds, and then step into the hours after, when the noise gives way to something quieter and more personal, the paperwork of loss. Somewhere in the crowd, someone whispers, "It will pass." Another whispers, "Sell." Most people simply listen, trying to decide which whisper sounds like truth. For now, let the story be distant, like thunder far across water. Let your jaw unclench. Let the bed hold you. You are safe here, and we are moving slowly. As the hours of Black Tuesday pass, the room begins to feel like a weather system. Orders arrive in gusts. Voices rise in bursts, then fall into brief pockets of quiet, then rise again. Runners thread through the crowd with paper held high. Clerks write, erase, rewrite. Telephones ring with a kind of insistence that makes the sound itself feel sharp. The ticker tape, overwhelmed, falls further behind. It prints and prints, but the present is already elsewhere. People who rely on it are forced to act without a clear picture. And when you act without a clear picture, you don't act on analysis. You act on urgency, on what you think others are about to do. The market stops being about the future of companies and becomes about time. Who will be late? Who will be stuck? The conversation shifts from, is this worth owning, to, can I get out? The body tightens around that question. Some investors reach for their brokers. They ask what their account requires. They ask what they owe. They ask what happens if they can't add more cash. A margin call is not a moral verdict. It is a simple request from a system that must protect itself. Yet, receiving one can feel like being asked to hold up a roof with your bare hands. For brokers, the day is a balancing act. Clients to serve, loans to manage, lenders calling in money, and prices that won't stay still long enough to measure. The business of calm becomes a job. A voice is kept steady. A phrase is repeated. We're working on it. We'll get you a price. And behind the steadiness is fatigue. On the floor, eyes fix on boards and gestures. The room is so loud that even shouting can feel like whispering into wind. Outside, ordinary life continues alongside the storm of numbers. A subway rumbles beneath the street. Someone buys coffee. A doorbell rings in an apartment building. That contrast can make the mind float, as if it has stepped slightly outside itself. And floating can be dangerous for decisions. When you feel unreal, you reach for anything solid. A familiar name, a familiar rumor, a familiar voice that sounds sure. In a crowded system, certainty becomes contagious, even when it is only performance. By the time the day begins to close, the tape is still chasing what has already happened. People leave with faces that look older than morning. Some will say later that the day felt endless. Others will remember it as a blur. Both are true in their own way because stress stretches time and then suddenly erases it. In the next part, we'll step into the evening after the crest, when statements are printed, accounts are totaled, and the noise collapses into silence that feels too large. The quiet arithmetic done at kitchen tables. Tonight, we hold it gently, like watching rain from under an awning. After the market's loudest hours, there is a different kind of sound. Paper. Statements, confirmations, notices, envelopes that arrive with polite language and hard numbers. The system that looked like shouting bodies and rushing runners turns back into what it always was beneath the drama: accounting. For many people, the first shock is not the fall itself, but the clarity that follows. A number becomes final. A loss becomes printed. Printed things have a peculiar weight. You can fold them, hide them in a drawer, carry them from room to room. You can't easily pretend they aren't there. Those who bought with borrowed money discover the sharp edge of leverage. When you put down a small amount and borrow the rest, a large drop can wipe out your entire stake. And when your stake is gone, the loan remains. This is the strange cruelty of margin. You can lose what you invested and still owe more. So the evening becomes a time of calls. People call brokers. Brokers call clients. Banks call brokers. Everyone is checking the same thing: what is covered, what is not, what must be paid, and how quickly. In offices, some lights stay on late. Ties loosen, ledgers open, letters are typed in careful, formal language. There is a hum of calculation, the kind that feels endless, because it is trying to make sense of something that moved too fast to grasp. At home, the arithmetic is quieter, but no less heavy. A person sits at a table where dinner was meant to be, and instead there are papers and a pencil. The lamp makes a small island of light. Outside that island, the room feels larger than usual. Emotions move in circles: disbelief, shame, anger, and a thin hope that morning will undo the day. Some people do not speak at all. They listen to the radiator click, to the refrigerator hum, to the city's distant traffic, and they try to understand how something so abstract could land so heavily in the chest. And yet, for many, there is numbness too. When change is too large, the nervous system softens sensation. People speak in shorter sentences. They go to bed and wake up as if the night has not happened. Even in the heaviness, there is dignity in the ordinary responses: folding papers, making lists, deciding what to keep, what to sell, what to postpone. It is also in these days that the distance between Wall Street and the rest of the country begins to shrink. Credit tightens. Confidence thins. The effects travel through banks, through businesses, through paychecks and orders. The ripples widen. In the next part, we'll follow that widening ripple, not as spectacle, but as a steady shift in daily life. The way a market event becomes a colder season. Tonight, we don't rush the meaning. We let it settle slowly. Now, a crash in a market can feel like a distant event, like a storm offshore. But money is a connective tissue. When it tightens, the body of society feels it, even far from the original shock. At first, the change shows up in decisions that look sensible on their own. A bank becomes more cautious about lending. A business delays an expansion. A manager decides not to hire the extra person they had planned to hire. A family decides to postpone a purchase just for now until things feel clearer. Each of these choices is small. Together, they begin to cool the economy the way evening cools a city, gradually, then all at once. Orders slow. Factories notice their warehouses filling. Shops notice customers browsing more and buying less. A farmer hears that prices for crops may be weaker next season. A landlord hears that a tenant is worried about the next month's rent. The uncertainty travels like a draft under a door. Banks are especially sensitive because banks depend on trust. A bank takes deposits and makes loans, balancing inflows and outflows like breath. If people begin to worry about the safety of their money, they may withdraw it. One person withdrawing is normal. Many people withdrawing at once is a different phenomenon. It is not only financial, it is psychological. A run can happen to a bank that is not evil, not foolish, not even necessarily weak. It can happen simply because fear spreads faster than reassurance. This is where the story becomes less about a single week and more about a widening landscape. The market's fall damages confidence. Damaged confidence makes people pull back. Pulling back reduces activity. Reduced activity leads to layoffs. Layoffs reduce spending further. The loop becomes self-reinforcing, like footsteps deepening a path in soft ground. There are also the practical constraints of the era. How countries and central banks think about money, about gold, about what is sound and what is dangerous. Decisions are made in offices far from the trading floor. Decisions that aim to preserve stability, yet sometimes make stability harder to reach. Tonight, we don't need to solve every policy question. We only need to notice how interconnected the system is and how a shift in one place can echo elsewhere, even among people who never owned a single share. In the evenings, the city's glow begins to change. Some lights turn off earlier, some storefronts look emptier. The mood is no longer celebratory, it is watchful. People begin to listen for news the way sailors listen for wind. In the next part, we'll sit with that watchfulness and move into the days that follow the crash, when the country begins to realize that this is not a moment that passes overnight, but a turning point that reshapes how people think about risk, work, and what security truly means. As days become weeks, the crash stops being a headline and becomes a texture. It shows up in the way people walk, slightly faster, as if they are trying to outrun uncertainty. It shows up in the way conversations begin, with a check-in, a cautious question, a glance at the paper before the coffee is even poured. It shows up in the way silence lingers after someone mentions the market, because everyone is deciding how honest to be. Businesses that once felt sturdy begin to conserve. They reduce inventories. They postpone equipment purchases. They trim hours. A layoff may start with a small list and a polite meeting, yet it changes a household immediately. A paycheck is not a luxury. It is the steady metronome of daily life. When it falters, everything else has to reorganize around it. And for those who remain employed, the fear can be its own burden. People work harder to appear necessary. They avoid taking sick days. They save more, spend less, and in doing so, unintentionally deepen the slowdown. It is not selfishness. It is self-preservation. In neighborhoods far from Wall Street, you can still feel the shift. A shopkeeper watches fewer customers come through the door. A factory owner sees orders thin. A teacher hears parents speak more anxiously about fees and futures. The idea of easy money fades, replaced by a desire for anything steady. The banking system, too, begins to tighten. Loans that were once readily available become difficult. Interest rates and terms become stricter. Even people with solid histories are asked for more proof, more collateral, more patience. Credit, which once flowed like an unseen river, becomes a series of careful drips. And yet, amid all of this, life continues to insist on itself. Children still play. Trains still run. Soup still simmers on stoves. People still find ways to be kind to one another in small, daily ways. History often remembers only the large motions, but the small motions are where human life lives. Tonight, we hold both truths at once. The economy is tightening, and the world is still breathing. Soon, we will begin the shift into understanding, into the lessons the year offers, not as harsh warnings, but as gentle patterns you can recognize. How borrowing changes outcomes, how crowds move, how information delays can amplify fear, how institutions matter most when confidence is thin. But before we turn fully to lessons, we pause here in the aftermath and let the story settle. Let it become quiet enough to listen to. In the next part, we'll start to lift out the first clear lesson from the wreckage, how leverage can turn a small wave into a tide, and why the calm choice is often to respect the sea, even when it looks glassy. And we keep breathing. Tonight, we begin to gather the first lesson the way you might gather driftwood after a storm. Slowly, with care, choosing only what is useful, leaving the rest to the sea. One of the clearest pieces is leverage, that quiet amplifier we met earlier. When you borrow to buy, you don't only increase what you can gain, you increase what you can lose, and you shorten the time you're allowed to be wrong. A small decline can become a demand for cash. A demand for cash can become a forced sale. And forced sales don't wait for good judgment. They happen because the mechanism requires them. In the late 1920s, borrowing had been woven into the market so thoroughly that many people didn't think of it as risk at all. It felt like modern convenience. It felt like belonging. But leverage changes the shape of a fall. It turns what might have been a long slope into a steeper hill. And it does something else too. It ties many separate people together. If enough investors are borrowed up, then a drop in price is no longer an individual problem. It becomes a shared event. The same call arrives at many doors. The same scramble happens in many rooms. A crowd that was once united by optimism becomes united by urgency. When you look at it this way, the crash is not only fear, it is geometry. It is the angle of a structure that has been leaned too far and can't easily straighten itself in time. There is a calmer way to hold this lesson, not as an accusation, but as a reminder that tools are not neutral. Borrowing is a tool. It can build, it can lift, but it requires humility because it always has a timer attached. So tonight, if your mind wants a simple image, picture a ladder. A ladder lets you reach higher than you can reach alone. But the higher you climb, the more you notice the ground. And now, as the country moves from shock to aftermath, we'll see another lesson emerging beside leverage. The lesson of liquidity, the ability to sell, the ability to breathe, the presence of an open door. In the next part, we'll follow that door and notice how it can seem wide, until suddenly everyone wants it at once. In those days, even people who considered themselves cautious could be drawn into borrowing simply because everyone around them treated it as normal. A friend might say, "Why leave your money idle?" A broker might explain margin, pointing out how common it was, how manageable it seemed, how easy it was to add a little more if needed. The tricky part is that leverage often feels safest right before it proves most dangerous. It feels safe at the top because the recent past has been gentle. Repetition can start to feel like permanence. So we tuck that lesson away like a small note in a quiet notebook. When a system offers an easy way to climb, it is worth asking how you come down. Now, we turn to the second piece of driftwood, the breath of the market itself. Liquidity is one of those words that sounds technical, yet it describes something very ordinary. The ease of turning what you own into what you need. In calm times, liquidity feels invisible. You assume you can sell when you want. You assume there will be a buyer, the way you assume a door will open when you turn the handle. Markets rely on that assumption. They feel stable because people believe in exits. But during the crash, many discovered what happens when the door narrows. Selling is easy when only a few people want to sell. It becomes harder when a crowd leans the same way because every seller needs a buyer, and buyers are not obliged to appear on schedule. When confidence is thin, buyers step back, waiting for the dust to settle, or tending to their own need for cash. So the market can begin to behave like a room where the lights are dimming. The fewer buyers there are, the more prices must fall to attract them. And the more prices fall, the more urgent selling becomes. A loop forms, not because anyone planned it, but because matching buyers and sellers has become strained. You can imagine this in gentle, physical terms. A narrow bridge, too many footsteps, a pause in the middle. People behind pushing forward, people ahead hesitating. The bridge hasn't changed, but the crowd has changed what the bridge can handle. In 1929, liquidity was also shaped by credit. When short-term loans were called back, the need for cash rose everywhere at once. People who might have preferred to hold were forced to sell. Forced selling is different from choosing to sell. It is sharper, faster, less patient. Liquidity isn't only about stocks. It's also about money in a bank, and the simple belief it will be there when you ask. Banks keep some cash ready and lend the rest. Most days that balance works because withdrawals are scattered. But when fear spreads, withdrawals can come in waves. A line forms at a counter. The line becomes its own message, and the demand for immediacy grows. This is a quiet lesson that outlasts any single era. The most important time to have an open door is the moment everyone else discovers they need one too. And there is another companion lesson: information. Not simply having it, but how quickly it moves, how clearly it arrives, and what the mind does when it must act without it. In the next part, we'll return to the ticker tape and the delays, and notice how uncertainty grows in the spaces between now and known. Even in a healthy system, liquidity is a kind of shared courtesy. It depends on many people not needing the same thing at the same time. When that courtesy breaks, prices and institutions have to adjust quickly, simply to keep functioning. Tonight, we don't hold the brutality. We hold the insight and let it rest in your mind like a smooth pebble warming in your palm. Information in 1929 moved with a kind of friction. There were telephones, yes, and there were wires humming between cities, and there were newspapers that could put the world in your hands by breakfast. But the market's most immediate language, the price right now, still had to travel through bodies and machines. It had to be shouted, written, transmitted, printed, and delivered. So on the busiest days, the ticker tape lagged. The tape did not lie. It was simply late. And lateness changes the mind. If you are told what happened 10 minutes ago, you begin to guess what happened since. You begin to picture it. You begin to react not to facts, but to your own imagination. And imagination under stress is rarely gentle. This is why delays can amplify a crowd. One person's uncertainty becomes another person's rumor. A rumor becomes a confident sentence. A confident sentence becomes a nudge, and 1,000 nudges become movement. In a market, speed is not only convenience, it is stability. Clarity arrives, and people can disagree with it, but at least they are disagreeing about the same present. When clarity arrives late, people act on different versions of now, and the room loses its shared footing. You might picture it as walking through fog with many others. If everyone could see the same landmark, even faintly, the group would move with some coherence. But if each person sees a different shadow, the group spreads, bunches, and jolts. The crash taught this softly. Uncertainty isn't only in the numbers. It is in the gaps between numbers. It also taught something about headlines. Newspapers had to choose tone, and tone can calm or inflame. A bold word can accelerate fear. A reassuring phrase can postpone it. And yet, reassurance without substance can create a different kind of danger, delaying action until the edge is nearer. Tonight, we hold this without blame. People were doing their best with the tools they had. The lesson is simply that in moments of stress, the quality of information, its speed, accuracy, and humility, matters as much as the information itself. Radio, too, carried voices into homes, and a voice can feel more convincing. People listened for confidence in a speaker's cadence, for steadiness in a sentence, for any sign that someone, somewhere, still understood the map. But maps are hardest to read when the ground is moving. So many decisions were made from posture and tone as much as from balance sheets. A broker's calm could buy a client an hour. A neighbor's panic could steal it back in a minute. So we tuck away another gentle note. In uncertainty, seek the clearest signal and be wary of the loudest. In the next part, we'll widen the lens further and look at institutions, banks, central bankers, and policymakers who were trying to steer a ship in rough water with instruments that were still imperfect. When a system shakes, people look for something that will not shake. In 1929 and the years that followed, many eyes turned to institutions, banks, the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, and the leaders who spoke on behalf of the country. These institutions were not all powerful. They were human organizations, built with rules, habits, and constraints that had made sense in calmer seasons. One of the largest constraints was the world's relationship with gold. Money was often treated as something that should be anchored, fixed to a standard, disciplined. The idea was stability. The cost was flexibility. In a downturn, responding quickly can require expanding credit, easing conditions, and supporting demand. Under a strict standard, those responses can feel limited, delayed, or politically fraught. So policymakers face difficult choices: protect the value of money as they understood it, or protect the flow of money through the economy. Tighten to defend soundness, or loosen to prevent collapse. Each choice carried risks, and each choice, when made slowly, allowed fear to deepen. Banks, meanwhile, were dealing with their own realities. Some had taken on too much risk. Some were simply caught in the tide of withdrawals. When depositors lose confidence and pull cash, even a careful bank can be strained. And when banks strain, they lend less. When they lend less, businesses strain. When businesses strain, households strain. The links are quiet, but they hold. This is the third lesson, appearing like a low, steady note beneath the story. Institutions matter most when confidence is thin, and their rules can either cushion a fall or steepen it. Yet even that lesson has a softer side. Institutions are not only they are people at desks, balancing competing fears, receiving imperfect information, aware that every decision will be judged later by calmer minds. Tonight, we let that complexity be soothing rather than frustrating. It reminds us that the world is rarely controlled by a single hand. It moves through many hands and many small choices. You can picture the scene away from the trading floor. Quieter rooms, thick folders, a clock that sounds louder than usual. People reading reports, listening to advisors, choosing words that will not add heat to the air. And as months passed, the country began to imagine guardrails, clearer rules, better disclosure, sturdier boundaries between everyday savings and speculation. Not perfect fixes, but a shift in mindset. Design matters. Another takeaway: systems are not nature. They are architecture. And architecture can be improved beam by beam. In the next part, we'll gather these strands, leverage, liquidity, information, institutions into a calmer framework, preparing to spend the final stretch of our journey on the lessons that endure. By now, the story has moved from a single crowded room to a whole landscape. We began with glow, late lights in the city, easy confidence, a sense that progress would keep arriving like the morning paper. Then we felt the wobble, the tightening, the lagging tape. We watched how borrowing turned small movements into sharp ones, how selling could become compulsory, how the door of liquidity could narrow when everyone reached for it. And then we stepped into aftermath. The paper statements, the quiet arithmetic, the ripple outward into jobs, shops, banks, and daily decisions. We widened further to the institutions trying to steady the ship, constrained by the rules and beliefs of their time, learning, sometimes painfully, that stability needs structure. Tonight, we don't carry the whole weight of that history. We only carry what is useful, and what is useful is often simple. A crash is rarely just a day. It is a chain of conditions, leverage that tightens, liquidity that vanishes, information that lags, and crowds that move together without meaning to. It is also a reminder that humans are pattern seekers. We love the comfort of a line that rises, and we dislike the discomfort of admitting a pattern can change. In the final stretch of our journey, we will set the events down gently and focus on lessons. 10 calm lessons like stones placed in a circle, not to scare, but to steady. Each one will be practical, human, and quietly relevant to modern life. How to think about debt, about exits, about confidence, about stories that sound too smooth, about the difference between risk you can see and risk that hides in the crowd. So, let your mind soften. Let the details blur at the edges. You do not need to memorize any of this. You only need to let the principles settle into you, the way a lullaby settles into the body without effort. And as we move into those lessons, we'll keep the same SleepWise promise. No drama, no sharp corners, only understanding, and the slow return to stillness. If you like, imagine the market as a shoreline at night. In calm weather, you hear a steady, familiar rhythm. In a storm, the waves come closer, louder, and you realize how much of the beach was always shaped by water you did not notice. Afterward, the sand looks different, but the sea has also left clues, patterns you can read the next time the wind shifts. That is what lessons are, patterns made gentle. We'll begin with leverage, then move to liquidity, then to information and crowd behavior, then to institutions and guardrails, and finally to the quiet personal habits that protect sleep and peace of mind in any era: patience, humility, and the willingness to step back from noise. So take a slow breath in and out. The world slows, and so do we, and our 10 stones of understanding begin to appear one by one in the soft dark. Leverage is our first stone, and it looks harmless until you hold it in the right light. Leverage is simply borrowed effort. It is tomorrow's money brought into today. In calm seasons, it can feel efficient, even sensible, like using a lever to lift a heavy box. Instead of straining your back, a small amount of your own cash can control something larger. And if the world moves in your favor, the reward can look surprisingly big. But 1929 taught a quieter, sharper truth. Leverage does not only increase risk, it changes the timing of risk. It shortens your patience because the lender has a schedule. It turns "I can wait" into "I must act." And when enough people are placed in the same must-act position, the crowd becomes a mechanism. This is why margin calls mattered so much. They were not a judgment, not a moral statement, not even a prediction about the future. They were simply a rule of the loan. If prices fall, add cash, or the position will be sold. The rule sounds tidy on paper. In real life, it can arrive in the worst hour, when everyone else is also searching for cash, and when selling feels like stepping into wind. So the lesson is humility. Borrowing is not evil. It is a tool. But tools come with conditions, and the conditions become visible when the weather changes. A calm way to ask the leverage question is this: what happens if I am wrong longer than I expect? Not wrong forever, just wrong for a season. Do I still have room to breathe? Do I still have room to sleep? This lesson travels far beyond markets. It applies to any promise that leaves no margin for ordinary life, an obligation that assumes perfect timing, a plan that assumes your energy will never dip, a schedule that assumes nothing will be delayed. Leverage, in a broader sense, is any structure that makes you fragile to small shocks. So imagine a ladder, helpful and ordinary. It can lift you toward something you want. But ladders are not places to rest. If you climb, it helps to know how you will come down, and whether the ground will still be there when you do. Tonight, we place this stone carefully on the windowsill. Borrow with cushions, borrow with time, borrow in a way that allows mistakes to be slow instead of sudden. In 1929, many people only discovered the true weight of leverage after the fall, when statements arrived and the arithmetic turned personal. It is one thing to watch prices drift down on a board. It is another to realize the loan remains even after your stake is gone. So, we keep the lesson gentle and practical. Respect leverage, because it is impatience disguised as help. If you must use it, keep it small enough that a wobble stays a wobble. Let your shoulders soften again. The story is becoming a set of quiet truths, and quiet truths don't need urgency. And now we move to the second stone, the one about doors and breathing, liquidity. Liquidity is the second stone, and it is about doors. In ordinary times, liquidity feels like a simple courtesy of the world. You reach for the handle and expect it to open. You list something for sale and assume a buyer will appear. You glance at your bank balance and trust that the money can be turned into groceries, rent, tuition, a plane ticket, a quiet surprise. Markets depend on that feeling. They depend on the belief that a seller and a buyer can meet at a price, and that the meeting will happen without drama. When liquidity is plentiful, it stays invisible, like oxygen. But in 1929, liquidity became visible because it began to vanish precisely when people needed it most. As fear spread, buyers stepped back. Some waited for a better price. Some waited for clarity. Some needed their own cash and could not offer it to others. And when buyers retreat, the only way to tempt them forward is for prices to fall. This is how a decline can accelerate. Falling prices create urgency. Urgency creates more selling. More selling demands more buyers, yet buyers are more hesitant because prices are falling. A loop forms, not because anyone planned it, but because the door has narrowed and too many footsteps pressed toward it at once. Liquidity was also tied to short-term credit. When call loans were tightened or called back, brokers needed cash and positions were sold, not because people had changed their minds about the future of companies, but because the plumbing required it. Mechanics became destiny. The calm lesson is not to fear markets, but to respect liquidity as a condition, not a guarantee. To remember that I can sell whenever I want is not a law of nature. It is a temporary agreement among many humans. Agreements can wobble when the room grows frightened, and this lesson belongs in life as much as in finance. Personal liquidity is the space that keeps you from being forced. It is the buffer in your savings, the flexibility in your obligations, the ability to wait a week, a month, a season without making sharp decisions from a hot moment. So we place this stone gently. Build exits before you need them. Keep options. Avoid arrangements that depend on perfect timing. And when you do take risks, leave yourself enough breath so the risk doesn't demand an immediate answer. If you want an image to carry, picture a crowded theater with one narrow aisle. In calm times, you can step out whenever you like. In a sudden rush, the aisle feels smaller than it truly is, Liquidity is that aisle. The wiser path is to sit where you can stand without pushing and to keep your own pace steady, even when others begin to hurry. In the next segment, we place the third stone, information. Not only what you know, but when you know it, and what your mind does when the present arrives late. Information is the third stone, and it is about fog. In 1929, prices did not glow instantly on 1,000 screens. They traveled through bodies and machines. They were shouted, written, transmitted, printed, and delivered. On the busiest days, the ticker tape simply could not keep up, and so the tape lagged behind the living moment. The tape did not lie. It was only late, and lateness changes the mind. When you are told what happened 10 minutes ago, you begin to guess what happened since. You imagine. You fill the gap. Under stress, the imagination is rarely gentle. It reaches for sharp endings because sharp endings feel like certainty, and certainty feels like control. This is how uncertainty grows teeth in empty space. A delayed market creates many versions of now. One person trades on a price that is already gone. Another trades on a rumor about what replaced it. A third trades on a friend's fearful tone. The crowd loses shared footing, not because people are irrational, but because they are acting on different shadows of the same moment. Headlines can amplify this. A bold word can accelerate fear. A reassuring phrase can slow it, sometimes wisely, sometimes dangerously. Tone becomes a kind of currency. People listen for steadiness in a speaker's cadence, for confidence in a sentence, for any sign that someone still holds the map. The calm lesson is clarity. In uncertain moments, the quality of information matters more than the quantity. Fast noise is not the same as useful signal. The loudest update is not always the most important. The most repeated rumor is not always a fact. And the lesson still fits modern life, even with modern speed. You can drown in updates and still be in fog. You can refresh and still feel less certain than before. So a gentle practice is to slow your intake, widen your time horizon, and wait for clearer signals before making sharp choices. If your mind wants a soothing metaphor, think of walking through mist with a lantern. The lantern doesn't show you the whole landscape. It shows you the next few steps. That is often enough. Another part of clarity is humility. Even experts can misread a turning point when the ground is moving, so it helps to hold your predictions lightly and to notice when you are reacting to the feeling of urgency rather than to solid facts. Urgency is a strong flavor. It makes everything taste important, even things that will not matter by morning. Tonight, we practice the opposite of urgency. We let the story be informative, but not activating. We let the breath stay slow, and we remember that not knowing everything right now is not a failure. It is simply the human condition. In the next segment, we place the fourth stone, crowds, the way human nervous systems synchronize and how everyone can become a force all on its own. Crowds are the fourth stone, and they are made of us. A market is not one mind. It is many minds, each watching the others, each searching for cues. Humans are social creatures. We read faces. We copy posture. We borrow confidence when we cannot manufacture it ourselves. Long before there were stock quotes, this habit helped us survive. If the group ran, you ran. If the group froze, you froze. Belonging was safety. In 1929, the crowd was everywhere. It was on the exchange floor, shoulder to shoulder, voices bouncing off stone and glass. It was outside on the sidewalks, watching boards as if watching a tide. It was in households where neighbors compared tips and reassured one another with the same familiar phrases. When a boom lasts long enough, the crowd's optimism begins to feel like proof. So many people can't be wrong, the mind whispers. And when a wobble appears, the same social wiring flips. So many people are worried. Maybe they know something. Herding can feel rational from inside the herd. The crash revealed how quickly synchronization can turn into momentum. One person sells to be safe. Another sees the selling and sells to avoid being late. A third sells because a margin call leaves no choice. Soon the movement has a weight of its own, and even calm individuals find themselves moving with it. This is not stupidity. It is nervous systems in resonance. So the calm practice is awareness. Notice when your decisions are truly yours and when they are shaped by the room's mood. Notice the phrase, "Everyone is doing it," and treat it like a bright warning light. Not because the crowd is always wrong, but because the crowd is powerful. This lesson belongs outside finance, too. Work panics, social media storms, group anxieties that rise like a collective fever. When the ambient air is hot, your thoughts can feel hotter than they really are. So, we place the crowd stone on the windowsill. You can belong without obeying. You can observe without rushing. You can let other people's urgency pass by like traffic noise outside a closed window. If you want a gentle image, picture a flock of birds at dusk. No single bird commands the turn, yet the whole flock shifts at once, as if guided by an invisible thread. The beauty is real, and so is the danger, because the same invisible thread can pull the flock toward a narrow space. Tonight, you are not in the flock. You are resting on the ground, watching, in and out, and watching. The more you can slow your own breathing, the easier it is to feel the difference between signal and stampede. Calm makes room for choice, and choice is the quiet opposite of panic. Next, we place the fifth stone, narratives, the stories that make risk feel safe, and the phrases that can smooth sharp edges until we forget they are sharp. Narratives are the fifth stone, and they are soft. A narrative is a story the mind uses to make the world feel coherent. It reduces complexity. It turns many uncertain variables into a simple arc. Progress, prosperity, a new era, a smooth line rising. Stories are not villains. They are how humans live. They give meaning to effort. They help us plan. They offer hope. But 1929 showed how a story can become too persuasive. In the late 1920s, one comforting idea floated beneath many conversations: that modern life had changed the rules, that industry and innovation had created a permanent upward path, that the old cycles were behind, and what remained was steady improvement. The story was not shouted every day, yet it was everywhere, like warm air. When a narrative is widely shared, it begins to feel like reality itself. And when it has been rewarded recently, it feels even more convincing. A rising market becomes evidence. A neighbor's profit becomes proof. A newspaper's confident tone becomes confirmation. The mind relaxes because the story offers the sweetest promise: you don't have to worry. This is where narratives can soften sharp edges. Borrowing feels normal because the story says the future will handle it. Concentration feels smart because the story says the winners will keep winning. Caution feels old-fashioned because the story says risk has been tamed. So the calm lesson is balance. Enjoy stories, but test them. Be gentle with optimism, but don't confuse it with certainty. Watch for phrases like, "This time is different." "It can't fail." "It always comes back." "Everyone knows." These phrases may comfort the nervous system, yet comfort is not evidence. A helpful question is simple: if the story were false, what would change? What would I do differently? Asking that question doesn't ruin hope. It strengthens it by grounding hope in reality instead of in enchantment. And this lesson also fits ordinary life. Sometimes we carry narratives about ourselves. I must always be productive. I can handle anything. I will never need help. These stories can feel noble, yet they can make us fragile too. If your mind wants an image, picture a river at night. The narrative is the reflection of the moon on the surface. Beautiful, persuasive, easy to follow. But the current underneath is the real force, and it does not care what the reflection looks like. The calm task is to appreciate the light while still respecting the current. We carry that respect forward now into the world of rules, institutions, and design. And now we move to the sixth stone: institutions and guardrails. The quiet architecture that matters most when emotions run high. Institutions and guardrails are the sixth stone, and they are about architecture. In calm weather, you rarely think about how a bridge is built. You simply cross it. You trust the beams you cannot see, the bolts you never touch, the calculations that were done long before you arrived. But in a storm, the bridge matters. Its design becomes part of your safety. Markets are the same. They are not wilderness. They are architecture. They are rules about disclosure, about lending, about what counts as collateral, about how quickly trades settle, about what is allowed to be hidden and what must be shown. When the rules are sturdy, emotions can surge without breaking the floor. When the rules are thin, emotion finds cracks. After 1929, the world slowly began to imagine more guardrails, clearer reporting, stronger standards, limits meant to reduce the quiet buildup of leverage and the temptation to disguise risk as novelty. These guardrails did not erase human nature, but they helped shape how human nature could express itself inside the system. A guardrail is not a punishment. It is a kindness. It protects the driver from the worst consequence of a single tired moment. It gives a car a second chance to correct its path. In finance, guardrails can protect ordinary savers from the sharp edges of speculation, and they can protect the system from cascades that begin with small triggers. There is also a deeper lesson here. Institutions do not matter most when everything is going well. They matter when confidence is thin. They matter when rumors move faster than facts. They matter when crowds are leaning toward the door. And institutions are made of people. That is the tender part. Decisions are made in quiet rooms by tired minds, with imperfect information, under pressure from politics and fear. So the goal is not to demand perfection from institutions, but to design systems that can withstand imperfect human emotion. You can borrow this lesson for your own life. Build small guardrails, automatic savings, clear limits on what you're willing to risk, a rule about not making big decisions when you are hungry, exhausted, or angry, a bedtime rule about when screens go dark. These are personal institutions, gentle ones, that protect you from the sharpest version of yourself. So we place this stone carefully. Safety is often designed, not hoped for. Imagine a house built for wind, shutters that close without panic, beams that flex without snapping, a porch that sheds rain. The house does not control the weather. It simply respects it. Guardrails are that kind of respect. Let the idea settle. Let the shoulders drop. The night is still safe. And now we move to the seventh stone, resilience, the quiet strength of not relying on a single thin thread. Resilience is the seventh stone, and it is about not balancing everything on one thin edge. In the boom, concentration can feel like clarity. One hot sector, one confident bet, one account that seems to rise every time you look. Concentration has a clean story. I know what I'm doing. And when it works, it feels like skill. But 1929 showed how concentration can turn uncertainty into catastrophe. When one pillar breaks, the whole roof can sag. When one source of funding dries up, everything that depended on it tightens. When one narrative fails, the confidence built on it wobbles, and then wobbles again. Resilience comes from variety. In finance, we call it diversification. In human terms, it is simply not placing your whole sense of safety in one basket. It is spreading risk across time, across assets, across sources of income and support, across different kinds of good day. Diversification is not thrilling. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't offer sudden transformation. It is quiet and patient, like a steady routine that keeps working even when motivation fades. And routines are what carry people through hard seasons. Resilience also includes buffers, cash reserves, lines of support, spare capacity. In engineering, redundancy can look wasteful in calm times. In a storm, redundancy is grace. It gives you options when the obvious path is blocked. This lesson travels into emotional life too. If your worth depends on one outcome, one deal, one promotion, one relationship behaving perfectly, then the world shakes whenever that one thing shakes. Resilience is having more than one source of meaning, more than one place to rest your identity. So, we place this stone gently. Build redundancy. Keep options. Let no single disappointment be allowed to become a total collapse. Accept slightly less upside in exchange for far less fragility. If you want an image, picture a braided rope. One strand can snap. Many strands together can hold. Resilience is braiding. In the years after the crash, many people learned resilience the hard way. They learned to distrust arrangements that required constant perfect luck. They learned to prefer steady wages over flashy promises, to value modest savings over forecasts, to keep relationships warm. Community can be a form of capital when money is scarce. Resilience is also psychological pacing. It is the ability to look at a difficult season and say, this is a chapter, not the whole book. It is the skill of continuing to eat, to sleep, to walk, to speak kindly, even when the future feels blurred. The body steadies the mind, and the mind steadies decisions. So let this stone rest with you for a moment. You are allowed to be steady. You are allowed to be slow. A resilient life is not a dramatic one. It is an enduring one. And now we move to the eighth stone, time, the overlooked protector, the quiet space that turns sharp mistakes into slower, manageable ones. Time is the eighth stone, and it is the most underrated form of safety. A short deadline can make a small problem feel enormous. In 1929, deadlines hid inside the credit system. A margin call is a deadline. A call loan is a deadline. A bank run becomes a deadline created by fear. These deadlines compress choices, and compression creates mistakes. The lesson is simple. When you remove time, you remove freedom. Time gives you room to wait out a mood, room to gather clearer information, room for a system to stabilize, room for your own nervous system to settle before you act. With time, you can respond instead of react. Without time, you are pushed into the hot moment, where the mind is loud and the body is tense. The heart seeks certainty, and certainty often comes in the form of a sharp decision. Sell everything. Borrow more. Make a promise you'll regret. Refresh the screen again. Chase the crowd. So a calm practice is to structure life so time is on your side as often as possible. Avoid obligations that demand perfection. Avoid plans that assume nothing will be delayed. Choose, when you can, the slower path that allows breathing. This is not laziness. It is design. A sturdy plan is rarely built in a hurry. A sturdy relationship is rarely built on constant urgency. A sturdy mind is rarely built on sleep deprivation and constant alerts. Time also separates noise from signal. A single headline is often noise. A sustained pattern is closer to signal. When you act too quickly, you trade peace for information that may not matter by morning. Sleep is time, too. It is the nightly reset that returns perspective to the mind. When you are rested, you can tolerate uncertainty without turning it into alarm. You can hear a rumor without obeying it. You can watch a number change without feeling your heart must change with it. So, we place the time stone on the windowsill. Protect your margins of time, because they protect your margins of safety. If you want a gentle image, picture the ocean. In a storm, waves arrive quickly, one after another, leaving no pause to recover. In calmer water, there is space between waves, and in that space you can breathe, adjust your stance, and stay upright. Time is the space between waves. In practical terms, time looks like an emergency fund that buys you months instead of days. It looks like debt that is long and manageable instead of short and sharp. It looks like saying no to commitments that pack your calendar so tightly that one surprise turns the whole week into collapse. It looks like leaving 15 minutes of emptiness between tasks, so life can be human again. So let the minutes soften. Let the clock be a sound in the distance. The lesson of time is a lullaby. When you have space, you can choose calm. Next, we place the 9th stone, humility, the quiet awareness that complexity is real and certainty can be a costume. Humility is the 9th stone, and it is a form of calm intelligence. In booms, certainty grows loud. People begin to speak with clean edges. It will keep rising. It can't fail, I know. Certainty is attractive because it quiets the mind. It gives the nervous system a sense of control, even when the world is too complex to be controlled. 1929 taught that certainty can be most convincing right before it is most wrong. Humility doesn't mean fear. It means leaving space for surprise. It means admitting you cannot see every variable, and that recent history is not a law of nature. It means holding your plan firmly enough to act and lightly enough to adjust. Humility shows up in small habits, stress testing assumptions, asking what could break, imagining a slower path, refusing to confuse luck with skill, not because you expect disaster, but because you respect reality. It also shows up as emotional honesty, recognizing when you are chasing validation, when you are afraid to miss out, when you are comforted by belonging more than by facts. Recognizing that your mood can color your interpretation of information and that an anxious mind tends to see sharp endings. When you notice those things, you can soften them. You can step back from the hottest moment. You can delay a decision until you are rested. You can ask for another perspective. You can choose not to make a lifetime promise on a single noisy day. This kind of humility is very sleep-friendly. It says, I don't have to solve everything tonight. I don't have to predict the future perfectly. I can do my best and still allow uncertainty to exist without turning it into alarm. If you want an image, picture a sailor in fog. The sailor doesn't shout at the sea for being unclear. He slows down, checks instruments, listens, and waits for the right shape of wind. Humility is that slowing. So we place this stone gently. Hold your predictions lightly. Keep your posture open. Let uncertainty be present without letting it drive. Humility also protects you from the temptation to keep checking, keep tweaking, keep chasing the perfect answer. It invites you to accept good enough when perfection would cost peace. It reminds you that the world is not a spreadsheet you can reconcile at midnight. In practical terms, humility can look like setting limits on information intake, especially when you notice that more news makes you feel less wise. It can look like writing down your reasons for a choice while you are calm, so you don't rewrite them later under stress. So let humility feel warm rather than heavy. It is not a lowering of ambition. It is a widening of perspective. And perspective is the thing the mind needs most when it is trying to rest. And now we come to the final stone, the one that belongs most naturally to this hour. Calm, the personal practice that protects your attention, your patience, and your sleep. Calm is the final stone, and it is not passive. It is protective. 1929 reminds us that much of what feels urgent is still at heart human emotion moving through a system. Fear and greed, relief and regret, confidence and doubt. These feelings can be measured in prices, but they begin in bodies, in breath, posture, sleep, appetite. When the body is tense, the mind interprets the world as sharper than it is. When the body is rested, the mind can hold uncertainty without turning it into alarm. So, the quiet lesson is this: the calmer your nervous system, the less likely you are to obey the crowd. Calm does not mean ignoring reality. It means approaching reality with steadier hands. It means having routines that keep you grounded when the world feels loud. A walk, a meal, a conversation with someone who doesn't speak in headlines. It means limiting exposure to constant updates that create fog instead of clarity. It means deciding in advance what truly deserves your attention and what is simply noise wearing a costume. There is a gentle dignity in stepping back, in closing the laptop, in letting numbers be numbers, not commandments, in remembering that attention is scarce and peace is scarce and sleep is scarce, and these are worth protecting. If tonight's story has left any restless energy in you, let it drain away now. Picture the crowded room emptying, the voices fading down a corridor, the boards going dark, the ticker tape, once frantic, becoming just paper again. Picture the city outside, still present, still breathing, its windows fewer, its streets softer, the glow thinning to a calm shimmer. The world has cycles. It rises, it falls, it repairs, it learns. And you do not have to ride every wave with your whole body. Here, in this room, the night can be simple again. Let your shoulders sink. Let your jaw unclench. Let the breath come and go like a quiet tide on sand. Imagine and standing above Wall Street after midnight. Stone buildings are quiet, columns holding up only darkness, the air slower than it was in the day. From that distance, the market becomes what it truly is, a human invention, useful and imperfect, never worth your peace. So if you feel urgency again, numbers racing, headlines flashing, remember the gentle tools. Make space, protect time, wait for clarity, and choose decisions only when you are steady. Let your eyelids grow heavy. Let unneeded thoughts drift past like clouds. Tomorrow can hold tomorrow's questions. Listen to the small sounds, fabric settling, a distant hush, your own breathing, steady and kind. With each exhale, imagine a little more space inside you, as if the day is gently folding itself away. Tonight can hold only this: a bed, a dim room, and a mind allowed to rest. Good night.